A small wooden pencil is a simple tool. It costs almost nothing and weighs very little. Yet, in the hands of a young girl with a big dream, it becomes more powerful than any weapon. This is the true story of a girl who refused to be silent when the world tried to take her voice away. It began in a place of great natural beauty. The Swat Valley in northern Pakistan is a land of green mountains and fast rivers. For many years, it was a peaceful place where families lived simply. People traveled from far away to see the snow on the peaks and the fruit trees in the valleys. It was here that Malala Yousafzai was born into a world that was about to change forever. When Malala was born, not everyone in her village was happy. In her culture, most people celebrated when a boy was born, but they were quiet when the baby was a girl. However, her father, Jaudin, was different. He looked into his daughter's eyes and saw a bright future. He named her after a famous female warrior who led her people into battle. Ziauddin was a teacher who believed that every child deserved to learn. He started a small school with very little money. Malala grew up in the classrooms, listening to the older students and smelling the ink on the paper. To her, the school was not just a building. It was a second home where her mind could grow as fast as her body. The school was a place of magic. Malala and her friends wore bright uniforms and talked about their dreams. Some wanted to be doctors and others wanted to be engineers. They felt safe inside those walls. Outside, the world was complicated, but inside the classroom, everything was possible. They believed that education was the key to a better and more peaceful life for everyone. As we travel through this story of courage, we want to know more about our listeners. Where are you listening from today? Please share your city or country in the comments. If you find these true stories of human strength moving, please consider subscribing to join our community. Your support helps us share these important narratives with more people across the entire globe. The relationship between Malala and her father was the foundation of her strength. Jaudin did not treat her like a servant or a second-class citizen. He encouraged her to think for herself and to ask difficult questions. He often told his friends that Malala was as free as a bird. He promised to protect that freedom, no matter what challenges the future might bring. But peace is often fragile. While Malala was enjoying her books and her games, a dark shadow was moving toward the valley. A group called the Taliban began to gain power in the mountains nearby. They had very strict ideas about how people should live. Most importantly, they did not believe that girls should go to school or have a public voice. Every morning, the mountains looked the same, but the feeling in the air began to change. People started to talk in whispers. Men with long beards and dark clothes appeared in the market. They told the people of Swat that their old way of life was wrong. They said that music, television, and Western education were sins that must be destroyed immediately. Education was not a luxury for Malala, it was her right. She watched as the atmosphere in her town grew heavy with fear. Her father remained brave, but even he knew that the situation was becoming dangerous. The Taliban were not just talking, they were taking action. They wanted to control the minds of the people by taking away their books and their information. There is a special kind of fear that comes when your home no longer feels safe. Malala noticed that her mother started locking the doors more carefully. Her father stayed out late at meetings, trying to find ways to keep the school open. The valley, which was once famous for its beauty, was now becoming famous for its danger. The darkness was closing in. However, shadows cannot exist where there is light. Malala decided that she would not hide. Even as a young girl, she understood that silence is a choice. If she did not speak, the people who used fear would win. She began to wonder what she could do to help her friends in her valley. Little did she know, her journey was just beginning. The change happened slowly at first, then very quickly. A man named Fazlullah began to speak on a private radio station. His voice entered people's homes every night. At first, he sounded like a religious leader, but soon his message turned to hate. He told the men of the valley to stop their wives from going to the market and their daughters from going to school. Public squares that were once used for markets became places of punishment. The Taliban began to burn things they didn't like. They made huge fires out of televisions, DVDs, and computers. They claimed these things were corrupting the people. For many adults, it was like watching their modern world disappear into smoke. The fear was becoming a physical weight on everyone's shoulders. New rules were announced every day over the radio. Women were told they must wear a heavy black cloth called a burqa that covered them from head to toe. They were not allowed to leave their homes without a male relative. This meant that many women were now prisoners in their own houses. The freedom that Malala's father loved so much was being taken away piece by piece. The Taliban started to target the schools. They believed that schools taught things that were against their religion. Over 100 schools were blown up or burned to the ground. Malala would wake up in the morning and hear the news of another building destroyed. She wondered if her father's school would be next. The sound of explosions became more common than the sound of birds. But here is what matters. Fear can only control you if you let it. Malala and her father decided to keep their school open as long as possible. Many parents were too afraid to send their children. The classrooms began to look empty. Each empty desk was a victory for the extremists. Malala sat at her desk and felt a deep sadness, but also a growing spark of anger. One morning, Malala saw a girl hiding her schoolbooks under her long shawl. The girl was walking quickly and looking around to make sure no one was watching. In that moment, a simple book became a dangerous object. Education was now an act of revolution. These young girls were risking their lives just to learn how to read and write. It was a terrible reality. The Taliban's influence changed the very color of the city. The bright dresses were gone. The music was silent. The streets felt cold even in the summer. Malala wrote in her notebook about how much she missed the old Swat. She missed the days when she could walk to the shops and buy candy without worrying about a man with a gun stopping her. Some people in the valley decided to support the Taliban because they were afraid. Others thought the Taliban would bring order. But most people were simply caught in the middle of a war they did not want. The army moved in to fight the extremists, and the valley became a battleground. Bombs and gunfire were now the background noise of Malala's daily life. What happens when a society loses its art and its schools? It loses its soul. Malala saw this happening to her neighbors. People stopped laughing and started looking at the ground when they walked. The trust between friends began to break. Everyone was a suspect. Malala realized that the Taliban were not just fighting for land, they were fighting to control how people thought. Zhaodin received many threats. People told him to close his school if he wanted to live. He was a brave man, but he was also a father. He worried every night about the safety of his wife and children. Should he stop? Should he stay silent to stay alive? He looked at Malala and saw her passion for learning. He knew he could not quit. The family decided to stay, even when others were leaving. They believed that if the good people left, the valley would belong to the extremists forever. They slept in their clothes so they could run if a bomb hit their house. It was a life of constant stress, yet they found small moments of joy by reading poetry together and sharing simple meals. In late 2008, the Taliban issued a final warning. They said that after the 15th of January, no girl could go to school. If a girl was caught going to school, she would be punished severely. This was the moment Malala had been dreading. The doors of her beloved school were about to be locked by force. Her heart was breaking for her future. And this changed everything. Malala realized that if she couldn't go to school, she would bring the school to the world. She decided that her voice was the only thing the Taliban could not take away. She was only 11 years old, but she was ready to fight for her right to learn. The world was about to hear from a girl who refused to be hidden. A journalist from the BBC was looking for a female student to write about life under the Taliban. Most parents said no because it was too dangerous. They feared the Taliban would find out and punish the family. But Malala's father asked her if she wanted to do it. She didn't hesitate. She wanted people to know the truth about what was happening in her beautiful valley. To keep her safe, she had to use a secret name. She chose the name Gul Makai, which is the name of a heroine in a traditional folk story. Every week, she spoke to the journalist over the phone. She told him about her dreams of becoming a doctor and her fear of the men in the streets. She wrote about her empty classroom and her lonely books. The diary of Gul Makai became very popular. People all over the world read the words of this young girl. They were shocked by the cruelty of the Taliban and moved by the courage of the students. Malala was giving a human face to a distant war. She was no longer just a statistic, she was a voice that people could relate to and care about. Writing the diary was a secret and dangerous act. Malala had to be very careful. She would write her notes and then hide them. If the Taliban found her writing, they would consider it an act of treason. But the act of writing gave her strength. It made her feel like she was doing something important. It gave her a sense of purpose during the darkest times. But here is what matters. A voice is most dangerous when it is the only one speaking the truth. As the diary became famous, the Taliban began to search for the person behind the name. Malala knew the risks, but she felt a responsibility to her friends. She saw how many of them were getting married at a young age because they had no schools to attend. The schools did eventually close. On her last day, Malala cried. She walked through the halls and touched the desks. She didn't know she would ever come back. But she kept talking to the BBC. She even started appearing on television with her father. She stopped using her secret name and started using her real name, Malala Yousafzai. She was stepping into the light. Her father's pride was mixed with a deep, silent terror. He saw his daughter becoming a hero, but he also saw the target on her back. He knew that the Taliban did not like being challenged, especially by a girl. He often wondered if he had done the right thing by encouraging her to speak. But when he looked at her, he saw a girl who was truly alive. Malala began to receive awards for her bravery. She won Pakistan's first National Youth Peace Prize. She traveled to different cities to talk about the importance of education. Each time she spoke, she became more confident. She told the world that the Taliban could take away their pens and books, but they could not stop their minds from thinking. The Taliban were not happy with Malala's growing fame. They sent messages to her father saying she should be stopped. They even put a threat against her on social media. Many people told the family to leave the country or at least go to a different city. But Malala's mother and father believed that they should stay in their home. They didn't think anyone would hurt a child. Internal struggles are often the hardest. Malala was still a young girl who liked to play with her brothers and fight over the remote control. She had to balance being a normal teenager with being a public figure. Sometimes she was scared at night, listening to the wind and wondering if someone was outside. But in the morning, her courage always returned with the sun. The war in the valley eventually slowed down as the army took more control. Schools were allowed to reopen for a while. Malala went back to her classes with her friends. They were older now, and the world had changed, but their love for learning was stronger than ever. They were the survivors of a dark period, and they were determined to make the most of their lives. As 2012 arrived, Malala was 15 years old. She was a leader among her peers. She was planning her future and thinking about how she could help girls all over Pakistan. She didn't know that the Taliban had made a final decision. They decided that Malala was too influential to be ignored. They saw her as a threat to their entire system of control. Her life was about to reach a turning point that would shock the entire world. The girl who used a pencil to fight for her rights was about to face the ultimate test of her courage. The silence of the valley was about to be broken by a sound that would echo across every continent and change the course of history. October 9th, 2012, started like any other Tuesday. The sun was shining over the Swat Valley and the air was crisp. Malala woke up, ate breakfast with her family, and went to school. It was exam season, so she was busy thinking about her studies. She laughed with her friends during the breaks, enjoying the simple happiness of a normal school day. After school finished, Malala and her friends boarded the bus to go home. The bus was actually a small truck with benches in the back. It was crowded and noisy with the sounds of girls talking and laughing. They were traveling down the familiar dusty roads, passing the shops and the trees they saw every single day. No one noticed anything unusual. Suddenly, the bus stopped. Two men in white robes stood in the middle of the road. One of them approached the back of the bus. He looked at the group of girls and asked a terrifying question, "Who is Malala?" The bus went silent. The atmosphere changed from joy to absolute terror in a single second. Everyone looked at Malala. Malala was the only girl whose face was not covered. She looked at the man. She didn't say a word, but her eyes gave her away. The man pulled out a black pistol. 3 shots were fired. The sound was deafening in the small space. Malala fell. 2 of her friends were also injured. The gunman ran away, leaving behind a scene of blood and chaos. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Her friends began to scream for help. Malala was unconscious, her head resting on her friend's lap. The driver drove as fast as he could to the nearest hospital. News of the shooting spread through the valley like a wildfire. Her father was at a meeting when he heard the news. He rushed to be by her side. The injuries were very serious. One bullet had traveled through her head and into her shoulder. The local doctors did their best, but they knew she needed specialized care to survive. Malala was moved to a military hospital in Peshawar. The entire nation of Pakistan held its breath. People of all ages gathered to pray for the girl who had spoken for them. The world began to watch. News organizations from every country reported on the attack. There was a global wave of anger. How could anyone attack a young girl on a school bus? The Taliban claimed responsibility, saying she was a symbol of Western culture. Their attempt to silence her backfired. Instead of making people afraid, it made them furious and more determined. Malala's condition was critical. Her brain was swelling, and her organs were beginning to fail. A team of British doctors who were visiting Pakistan helped with her treatment. They recommended that she be moved to a hospital in the United Kingdom where she could receive the best possible care. It was a risky journey, but it was her only chance for survival. A private jet was sent to transport her. Her parents had to stay behind at first because of paperwork and the safety of her brothers. Malala traveled thousands of miles across the world while she was in a coma. She was alone in the air, caught between life and death. The world prayed that the girl from the mountains would have the strength to wake up. The story was no longer just about a school in a small valley. It was now a global symbol of the fight between light and darkness. Malala had become a daughter to the whole world. People who had never heard of the Swat Valley were now crying for her. They sent flowers, cards, and teddy bears to the hospital in Birmingham where she was taken. In the hospital, doctors worked day and night. They performed multiple surgeries to repair the damage to her skull and her hearing. They didn't know if she would ever walk or speak again. The damage was severe, but Malala was a fighter. Even in her sleep, her body was working hard to stay alive. She was a miracle in progress. This was the day the world stopped to look at the courage of a child. The gunmen thought they could kill an idea by shooting a person. But as Malala lay in her hospital bed, the idea of education for every girl was growing stronger than ever before. The journey back would be long, but Malala was not finished with her work yet. 1 week after the attack, Malala opened her eyes. She was in a hospital in Birmingham, England. She didn't know where she was or what had happened. She couldn't speak because of the tubes in her throat. She wrote her first questions on a notepad. Where is my father, and why am I here? She was confused and very far from home. Slowly, the memories began to return. She remembered the man on the bus. She realized that she had been attacked. But the most important thing for her was the safety of her family. When she finally spoke to her parents on the phone, she didn't cry about her pain. She asked if they were safe. Her concern was always for those she loved. Birmingham was a very different world from Swat. The weather was cold and gray, the streets were clean and quiet. Malala looked out of her hospital window at a city she didn't recognize. She missed the green mountains and the smell of her mother's cooking. But she knew that this new place was where she would find her second chance at life. The physical recovery was very painful. She had to learn how to walk again. She had to undergo many operations to fix her face and her ear. There were moments of great frustration. Sometimes she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl looking back at her. But she never gave up. She took one small step every day, literally and figuratively. Explanation? Malala's brain had been badly hurt. The doctors had to put a piece of her skull in her stomach to keep it safe before putting it back. It was a complex medical process. Example: she spent hours practicing simple movements with her hands. Takeaway: this shows us that the human body is incredibly fragile, but the human spirit can overcome almost any physical injury. Thousands of letters began to arrive at the hospital. They came from world leaders, celebrities, and thousands of regular children. One child wrote, "We are all Malala now." These messages gave her a huge amount of strength. She realized that she was not alone in her fight. The whole world was standing behind her, cheering for her recovery and her mission. Her family finally arrived in England. The reunion was full of tears and joy. Her father, Ziauddin, felt a heavy weight lift from his heart when he saw her smile. He had blamed himself for what happened, but Malala told him she didn't regret anything. She told him that she was proud of the choice they made together to stand up for education. The Taliban had failed. They wanted to kill Malala to stop her message, but they only succeeded in making her voice louder. Instead of being a local activist, she was now a global leader. She decided that she would use her new platform to help girls everywhere. She knew that her life had been saved for a reason, and she was determined to fulfill it. But here is what matters, she realized. The bullet had failed to kill her dreams. In fact, her dreams had grown. She didn't just want education for the girls in her valley anymore. She wanted it for the 60 million girls around the world who were not in school. She began to see her survival as a responsibility to speak for those who could not. She started a new school in Birmingham. It was strange for her to be a student again. She had to adjust to a new language and a new culture. The other students were kind, but they didn't know the things she had seen. Malala tried to be a normal teenager, but she was also working on her book and preparing for the world stage. The recovery was not just physical, it was emotional too. She had to deal with the trauma of the attack. She had bad dreams and was sometimes afraid of loud noises. But she had a great support system. Her mother, who had never learned to read or write, started taking lessons in England. This inspired Malala even more to continue her work for education. She established the Malala Fund with her father. This organization was created to help girls get back into school in countries like Nigeria, Jordan, and Pakistan. She traveled to meet girls who were living in refugee camps and war zones. She listened to their stories and told them that they were brave. She became a sister to every girl who was struggling. Malala often talked about the power of the pen. She said that one child, one teacher, one book, and one pen could change the world. She believed that education was the only way to end poverty and war. She didn't want revenge against the men who shot her. She said that she wanted education even for the sons and daughters of the Taliban. Her story became a best-selling book called I Am Malala. It was translated into dozens of languages. People everywhere learned about the beauty of the Swat Valley and the struggle of its people. Malala was no longer a victim. She was a survivor and a hero. Her face was now known by millions, but she remained humble and focused on her goals. And this changed everything. The girl who was once silenced was now being invited to speak at the most important buildings in the world. She was preparing for a moment that would define her career as an activist. The world was waiting to hear what she would say when she finally had the chance to address the leaders of the planet. On her 16th birthday, Malala stood before the United Nations in New York. She was wearing a shawl that had belonged to Benazir Bhutto, the first female prime minister of Pakistan. The room was filled with world leaders. There was a respectful silence as she walked to the podium. She looked small, but her presence was incredibly powerful. The world was listening. She didn't speak about her pain or her scars. Instead, she spoke about the rights of every child. She said, "They thought that the bullets would silence us, but they failed." And then, out of that silence came thousands of voices. She called for a global struggle against illiteracy and poverty. Her speech was met with a long-standing ovation that echoed through the halls. In 2014, Malala received the greatest news of her life. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. At 17 years old, she was the youngest person ever to receive this honor. She shared the prize with Kailash Satyarthi, an activist from India who fought for children's rights. It was a historic moment for two people from different religions and countries to stand together. The Nobel ceremony in Norway was a celebration of peace. Malala looked at the audience and said she was not just one girl, but one of many. She accepted the prize on behalf of all the children who want peace and education. She told the leaders of the world that it was time to take action. She wanted to see every child in school in her lifetime. Explanation: the Nobel Peace Prize is given to people who do the most work for the brotherhood between nations. Example: Malala used the prize money to build a school in Pakistan. Takeaway: this shows that true power does not come from winning a war, but from changing the lives of others through kindness and hard work. Despite her fame, Malala continued her own education. She studied at the University of Oxford, one of the best universities in the world. She chose to study philosophy, politics, and economics. She wanted to understand how the world works so she could change it more effectively. She attended classes, wrote essays, and made friends, just like any other student. Malala's work took her to many dangerous and difficult places. She visited girls in Kenya who were escaping child marriage. She visited girls in Iraq who had lost their homes to war. She always listened more than she spoke. She wanted to know what the girls needed and how she could help them achieve their dreams. She was their voice in the world. She has met with presidents and queens, but she always says that the most important people she meets are the students. She believes that youth is not a barrier to change. She encourages young people to believe in themselves and to speak up against injustice. She often says that we should not wait for someone else to lead, we should lead ourselves. The Malala Fund has now raised millions of dollars. It supports teachers and builds schools in places where they are needed most. It advocates for policy changes at the highest levels of government. Because of Malala's courage, thousands of girls who were once told they could not learn are now sitting in classrooms, writing their own futures with their own pencils. Malala says she does not want to be remembered as the girl who was shot by the Taliban. She wants to be remembered as the girl who fought for education. She has turned a moment of tragedy into a lifetime of service. Her story teaches us that we can choose how to react to the bad things that happen to us. One person, no matter how young or small, can indeed shift the direction of history. Malala's life is a living proof of this idea. She started as a young girl in a remote valley, and she became a symbol of hope for the entire world. Her journey shows us that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. As we look back at the story of Malala Yousafzai, we see a path marked by courage and determination. From the green hills of Swat to the halls of Oxford, she has never forgotten her roots. She still loves her valley and hopes for a day when it will be completely peaceful and every child there can walk to school without fear. The state of global education is improving, but there is still much work to do. Millions of girls are still held back by poverty, war, and tradition. Malala's story is not just a history lesson, it is a call to action. It reminds us that our voices are tools that we must use to help those who are still being kept in the shadows. Recap. We started with a small wooden pencil in a classroom and ended with a global movement for human rights. Malala survived an attack that was meant to end her life, and she used her second chance to light a fire of hope for others. Her courage changed the laws, the minds, and the futures of countless people around the world. The human spirit is incredibly resilient. When we are faced with darkness, we have the power to create light. Malala Yousafzai showed us that even the smallest voice can become a roar that shakes the world. Remember, a pencil is a simple tool, but when it is used to write the truth, it can change everything forever.